back to your, Studio Neta, are you maintaining any kind of relationship with contractors like that, that people that are
Absolutely.
in that network?
Yeah, absolutely. Relationships with contractors are huge.
Mhm.
It takes a team to complete a project,
Right.
especially complex ones, and the contractor is a critical part of that. So we keep, yeah, very close relationships with several builders, and uh, always end up working with new people as well along the process. But having a close relationship, a working relationship, doing it, working as a team to get to an end goal, I think is always our primary focus
Is
because
there anything like at the beginning, like from start to finish when you meet with a client or a contractor, whichever comes first? I mean, sometimes, which came first, the chicken or the egg? I mean, sometimes the people look for the contractor and then they're like, well, how do we do this? And the contractor's like, well, we need plans. And sometimes they go to an architect and they're like, well, who's going to do it? And they're like, well, we need a builder. And then so that's sort of the juggling act, I guess, that you might experience with clients, streamlining that process. What would be your biggest challenge? You did mention getting a consistency in the pipeline, which is everybody in business wants a consistent flow of business, I myself included. When we start slowing down, I get nervous and I'm looking months down the road, like, okay, what's coming next? And that's always my concern, is making sure that we have a steady flow of business coming in. And then on top of that, you know it is my processes, the streamlining of like automaticity, I guess. Some of the things that I've been able to establish in the paint company, which we've done successfully, is that we've got automated processes that we, pretty much plug and play. We've gotten some systems together that help our customer relations management, which has been highly beneficial in taking a lot of the, beginning legwork out of, qualifying the customer, qualifying the people and the job, to, streamlining us towards getting, the qualified, pipeline of leads and people that we've been able to work with this past, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, but the last 3 years in general have been a major improvement for us. So that's what I like to talk to other businesses about, is to see what other people are doing to improve that, because that to me is like probably one of the biggest challenges. I don't know if that's the same challenge for you. It's getting.
absolutely. Do you use online forms and filter?
Absolutely. We have several different processes that we use to reach our client, but also, to get them onboarded, so to speak, to where they're queued up to that first initial, meet and greet, if you will, where there's some preliminary questions that we have that, a human being is, capable of asking them, but we use a lot of, you know, um, SEO and AI stuff that helps keep the conversation going. Once we find someone who's interested, it kind of keeps the conversation flowing and getting all the information, so that way when we're queued up for the meet and greet, we've got a package of what to expect with this client, what they're looking for, and I'm already geared up, and I didn't have to go through the initial legwork of back and forth, the communication back and forth, trying to get the timing right. And then, the call is booked type of thing, where we're locked and loaded and ready to get in front of the client and focus in on, really what the bones of their project are, and work on getting that project sold. So that's kind of what we've been doing. But, as far as Studio Neta goes, what I mean, if you would like to see a projected, workload in the next 6 to 12 months, what would that be? And would you consider bringing on other architects to work under you, or people that could handle the extra workload? Because, like, we talked about it, if a business is good and you provide a good service, it's almost impossible to stay the same size and continue being good. It's that rubber band effect, which, one of two things happens. And I experienced this about 15 years ago, maybe 10 years, probably about 15 years ago, where I knew that I had so many matches left in my matchbook to burn up before I was going to burn out. And I was like, well, I better delegate and, divide and conquer, because there's no way I can manage my clients, all the demands, because, you get one good client, they refer another, and then that one refers another. And then before you know it, it's, tripled. And when when it all comes in, it's tough to want to turn away the business. So I had to kind of, train and delegate. And now I have, well, right now I'm very fortunate. My son-in-law wanted to come to work into the business. So I've trained him to do a lot of the all of the estimating and sales. And now I just work on the business, but I still enjoy, going after the business and going out on the projects and checking out the work that we're doing and making sure that we're, keeping the quality up. And that really has been one of the biggest, saving graces for me, to have longevity in the business as well as help grow the business, which, I had to come to terms with that. I'm gonna have to, like, let go of the reins and give someone else that responsibility if I'm going to be able to grow this thing. Otherwise, I'm going to be in the rubber
Absolutely.
band effect, for forever. And I knew I couldn't last that way, because there were those moments when I was so strung out and stressed from having to manage one too many tasks, and, trying to keep the quality and the deadlines met. That was the biggest challenge for me. I don't know if that is something that you can relate to.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think you touched on a couple interesting points there. I guess the first one being kind of setting up a process to onboard or filter client leads, and I think that's huge in what we do with residential work. A lot of people in a commercial project might have done a handful of projects in the past and might be familiar with the process and understand roughly how things are going to play out and have their budget in line and their anticipated schedule accounted for. But from a residential perspective, often it's somebody's first project, or they've done one before a while ago and they're coming at it a second time. And the variation within the industry is so wide that there's not a consistent process across every single builder, architect, for getting a project completed. So it I think a big learning lesson over the years for me has been to manage expectations in a way that sets things up for success. So understanding what's going to happen, anticipating questions or issues that might come up from the client's perspective, and then trying to put that in a organize processes in a way that help manage that without having it snowball into something where you're getting calls every day, or so trying to set up consistent meeting times and scheduling those in a way that covers a series of tasks that slowly build upon each other, because it's very easy to kind of circle back, second guess when you're building your home and spending a lot of money on something. People care a lot about it, and depending on the person, some people are very decisive, make clear decisions, well thought through, and others like to circle back and think through things multiple times. And so it's dealing with different people's personalities and trying to respond to them in a way that is useful, and because it is a personalized interaction. It's as a small studio. I think that's why a lot of people, owners, come to us, is to have um, direct interaction, feel like they're getting direct service. But it's a balance of that mixed with trying to set up systems, like you're saying, systems that help streamline things, help take care of the questions that somebody can answer as an individual, but you can also set up a onboarding sort of checklist or things to expect that help streamline and smooth out that process from the.
If you could wave a magic wand, I mean, aside from, like, the steady flow of, customer client base, influx of leads and all that, aside from that, if you could wave a magic wand to solve one problem in your industry or with Studio Netta, what would that look like?
Well, there there are a number of things I'd love to do, but just in relation to that last thing, I think trying to set up a way for easy and clear decision making, the client's perspective, is which we try and do. It's try and set up a structure and a framework that makes it
It's
clear what.
tough, yeah.
Yeah, it's tough, but when you're dealing with a creative industry, and especially the bigger the project or the more complex or the more variation that can take place, there's a lot of nuance, and it's sometimes not everything fits into the same. You can fit it into a rough framework, but there's
Mhm.
still individual aspects to each project.
There's a lot of room for creativity within that framework. I understand that. So, what I think, is the big question is, if you did have that system in place where you felt like at least a lot of the initial legwork and, getting up to that point where, okay, we've got the frame built. Now we're talking about the insides, and then you design whether we want a wall, a knee wall, or vaulted ceiling or flat ceiling, or aside from different things that you might encounter within that. Okay, we want an addition or we want a renovation done, and we definitely want to get it done by this spring, or at least get it started breaking ground by this spring. Can you get drawings ready for this 1,000 square foot addition or whatever it is that we're looking at? you know, there's the framework. We have a bunch of ideas, floating through our head, and I'm your client, and I'm thinking, all right, we've got a lot to figure out, but this is what we want in a nutshell. Getting to that point, is really, probably some of the initial legwork that I would imagine takes some of your time.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think the a big aspect is another thing that if you could wave a magic wand would be coordinating pricing. At least in New York City, the cost across different contractors varies significantly.
You don't
Sometimes,
have any control over that.
yeah, no control over that except who you go to, who you partner with to complete a
You
project.
could predict some of it based on who you've worked with in the past,
Exactly. So,
like
it
square footage
always
type.
goes up. Everything's always more expensive than the year before.
Sure.
That's consistent, but yeah, there's different contractors who have different communication styles, levels of detail, attention, and focus, and both with us and the client. So trying to both read what the client's needs are. Some clients are more willing to deal with kind of an ad hoc approach to things if it allows for a lower budget, and some need a more professional service that goes, yeah, clear communication. And so that's a big variable that we deal with. And I think trying to match early on in the process, it's a big aspect is trying to match client goals and expectations and hopes for the project to budget realities. And because they're so variable, it can be difficult to do that. But one big aspect, yeah, at least in New York City, is partnering with contractors to help bridge that gap and understand what's feasible within a certain amount
So
of resources.
if we're looking at a snapshot of Studio Neta, during, the steady periods, how many projects do you typically work on at once, or are you capable of handling, I should say, at once, you as an individual? Like what do you typically feel what's your comfort level as far as load goes?
Usually around 4, 3 to 5,
Okay.
in that
At
range.
different various stages.
Various stages, and some are finishing, some are in the design process, and they take different amounts of attention depending on where they're at in the phase. Yeah,
And
some
how long does each client typically, like, if you were to average it out, how long are you ending up working with a client from start to finish when they're finally done and, your work is done and they've paid you out? How long is that?
yeah, that's I mean, it varies a fair amount depending on the scale of the project. For an apartment, usually we'll try and start and end design within 3 months. That rarely
3
happens.
months? Okay,
Usually it ends up dragging on for there's any given number of reasons.
sure.
So it usually under. Yeah, maybe that adds a month or 2 after that, but then construction, we're always involved throughout the construction process. And for a small apartment renovation, often the last 6 months, for a big addition or ground up home that can well over a year and a half to 2 years. So it can be a long process, yeah, up to 3 years, kind of down to it can be under a year, up to 3 years, depending on the scale of the project.
I often wondered, there's, so down the pipeline. So if you were to, have a number of clients that you would work with and within a year, so you're like at 4 clients every 3 months, 4 months, you're looking at, maybe 16 to 20 clients a year is what you would shoot for, to have around the clock, as far as like overlapping throughout the year, that would be your total, or do
No,
you do more than that?
usually it's less than that. So the design phase, um, then would roll into construction phase. So we do construction administration. So that's a lighter touch on our end. We don't have to have as much involvement in the process at that point. So we could have a few ongoing CA projects at any given time, a handful, and that's typical. But I would say for and then for a bigger house, ground up house, or an addition, that design process can extend out 6 months. And permitting takes longer too, for if it's an addition or a new construction.
Do you offer different services other than the rendering of the drawings and the, I guess, engineer approved, permit ready drawings? Do you actually offer to take that stuff to the city or the county, or do you just hand it off to the homeowner typically and give it to the contractor or whoever needs it?
No, we'll handle everything through, yeah, through start to finish. So design, permitting with the city, dealing with
Wow.
all the
So you
ins
guys are like full on, full service when it
yeah,
comes to getting everything ready to break ground.
mhm,
So
exactly.
you roll out the red carpet. That's nice.
Yeah, and it's yeah, and then our involvement in construction is often dependent on the contractor, but we're
So do you
always
find yourself doing a lot of site visits out, all over the city and then outside the city when you are building outside of the city?
yeah, absolutely. So often we'll go weekly or
Sure.
every other week. Sometimes we'll be able to do calls and then mix that with physical site visits, but definitely involved throughout construction
So
typically.
I'm sure there's some like level of, predictability when it comes to how much involvement you're going to have on certain projects. I mean, there's probably some projects where you're going to turn the drawings over to a contractor. And I mean, it's not so big and involved that you're going to need to be on site. No?
Yeah, there are certain projects where we have limited involvement or none, very,
And
very
you
small.
factor that into your,
Absolutely. Yeah. The construction administration phase is interestingly some of the toughest to predict. You can either have a clear cut, if it's something where the contractor is confident or the owner is capable of handling everything, we're able to say we can just stop at the design drawings and permit and hand it off from there. But that rarely happens. Usually we're asked to be involved through construction. It's, if we have a clear cut and aren't involved, that's an easy break. And then we just have to sign off the job when it's completed. But if we're involved, then there's a range within that construction timeline that we can, yeah, be more or less involved. And that's sometimes hard to predict. And if there's always unknowns that come up, especially when with dealing with existing buildings and renovations. So the amount of questions or curveballs that come along vary depending on the project.
do you ever get overwhelmed at times, like where you feel like the workload has gotten to be, you're maxed out and seems like it's too much at times?
Definitely, yeah. There are certainly times where it feels overwhelming, and then like you said, other times where it ends up being quieter. So we found a number of resources for certain aspects of the process that we can outsource or lean on to help expand the team. You know,
Like other architects, you mean? Or what do you mean? What are you referring to?
usually not architects, but sometimes we'll get help with drawings, with renderings, with it's usually a very specific aspect of the process that is only one piece of the puzzle. But if we have a lot of work to get through, that's sometimes helpful in planning out, getting through heavy lift periods. Or if we have a big project load to push through, we'll lean on that. But certain things like construction administration do not lend themselves to uh leaning on somebody else. So it's something that you end up dealing with internally. So certain things are more amenable to, yeah,
So
bringing
you
it.
handle all of your own administrative tasks, accounts receivable, billing, and all that, and you handle all that?
Currently, yes, I think if as we grow, to probably look at restructuring that. But at the moment,
That
yeah.
that was a game changer for me, Travis, for the first 10 years, first 8 or 9 years I was in business. I was chief cook and bottle washer, and I was estimator, worker, administrator, and I'm a lousy administrator, I'll admit it. When it came to thank God for QuickBooks, because that's what I just was like the bare bones QuickBooks, and that's what worked off of. And since then we've changed up some platforms, and we have a different platform that we use now that has helped us streamline. We've outsourced a lot, but I do have an administrator, and I'll tell you what a game changer it was, because it allowed me to focus on, just focusing on, sorry, getting the work and doing the work, or at least, training people to take care of the work as we got more business in, and continued to grow. I needed to work on staffing and training and kind of working on the business and not so much in the business. And that was a big game changer for me, because I needed that person, that backbone, even if it was 20 hours a week initially, but I really had a hard time with that. So I had to find somebody full time, but they became sort of my go-to person for all administrative tasks, as far as like, vetting customers and clients and emailing and responding and handling the billing and the accounts receivable, accounts payable, and keeping things in line, so that way I could focus on, just the other aspects of the business that I think were going to help it maintain and grow. That was a huge game changer for me. And I ended up getting a business coach at 10 years or 11 or 12 years maybe. And and he's like, man, what are you doing? He's like, you've got to get an administrator. You've got to get somebody to handle, your day to day stuff that, for me at that point, I was at that point where I was getting stretched out to the point where I was so busy, I knew I was not going to be able to sustain. And I needed to, like I said, divide and conquer. So I needed to kind of delegate some of these tasks that didn't require the experience or skill that I was, proficient in, which was definitely not administrative. But um, it kind of funneled into these other areas of the business that I really wasn't keying into, that were going to continue helping me grow and establish a footing that today allows me to, have, a whole different lifestyle that, I know if I at 10 years did not make that change, I would have burned out, and I would have been like some of the other people I know, where they just kind of like went until they couldn't go any further. And then it was just like, well, what happened? Oh, I just sold everything and I'm done, and they just moved on. Or they just kind of got to that phase where, they just kind of hit this glass ceiling, and they kind of bounce up and down along that glass ceiling. And even though they might be the most skilled, I have a lot of guys in the building industry that are amazing, and they're much more talented than I am, as far as carpentry and skill level and eye for detail. And I'm amazed, because, they some of them have, 10, 20 years my senior, which is hard to imagine, but they're in their 60s, and they just kind of, skim along there. And I look at, what happened there versus, the things that I was shown from Brandon Lewis, this guy who, mentors paint companies, when I decided to go all into painting. But it taught me so much about business that allowed me to kind of loosen up the reins a little bit and focus on what really mattered, and allowed other people to kind of handle certain tasks that I didn't realize I was getting inundated with, which prevented me from having the strength, endurance to work with another person to train them to become a mini me, if you will, somebody who could kind of do what I do the same way, in the same fashion, at the same standard and quality. And I could then continue to focus on just developing those systems that we talked about, that are, helping streamline the pipeline, if you will, to allow people to come in and do business with me, and my company. So that's really what I'm fascinated mostly with, is how other people are developing those systems, and what they're using and what they're utilizing, and, the struggles that have, led us to, either make or break that opportunity, So, when it comes down to it, we all have a wish list, and I know I certainly do, and it's always, you know, a steady streamline, but it requires work and willingness for me to let go and kind of let loosen up the reins a little bit to allow somebody to step in and take care of some of those things when the time comes. I mean, I you don't want to do it before that time, but you'll know, and I knew that that time when it was like, okay, if I don't do this now, I'm not going to be able to sustain, and I'm just going to get frustrated with some of these other tasks that really personally I didn't enjoy. I enjoyed the other aspect of it, which was, seeing a project from start to finish and carrying that through and developing and implementing the system that we have today, where the crew leaders, our project managers, our salesperson, even our administrative person can kind of roughly through it. And it reflects in our website too, the process that we lead our clients from start to finish, to where we kind of hold their hand, but it's already laid out like in the framework, so to speak, where they kind of see what the expectations are right at the beginning. And it kind of trains them to kind of say, okay, I feel like I'm going to be taken care of, and it kind of handles all their anxieties and their objections right out of the gate, because it's addressing the concerns that are swimming around in people's heads before they're even able to acknowledge. They're just like, oh, I'm trying to figure these things out, and it's like overload. But when you hand deliver options for people and you kind of lay out the framework of how things are done, they're like, oh, that makes sense, yeah, let's do it this way. And it leads the customer through this experience, and that's kind of what we worked so hard to achieve, even though it's something simple like getting your house or your building or your, whatever painted. you know, it's still the same exact process, whether it's painting, whether it's home building, whether it's buying a house, whether it's, anything that involves, people, you're dealing with the same challenges, which is, the built-in objectives, in someone's mind about how things are supposed to look, how they want them to look, and how they want it to turn out. And
Absolutely.
allowing people to have that, foundation on your company to see how that, takeoff, the runway is clear for takeoff. They're like, oh yeah, I can do it here, and they've made it easy for me. And that to me has been the biggest game changer for us. So,
Yeah.
it also allows us to set the goals for, 6 months, a year down the road. Like, okay, well, now that we know we've got this runway for clients to come in and take off with their project, let's focus on fueling up the airplane, and let's get it ready for takeoff. And at that point, it's just about, navigating each, project. And that's really where the passion for me is just, kind of seeing opportunities and projects and how cool would that be? We jump on a lot of, I mean, I've watched this city grow for the last 25 years here, and I've been a part of it because I look around at the buildings and I'm like, well, we did that one, we did that one, and a lot of high rises in town. And, when we started out, I couldn't imagine doing something like that, because I was like, wow, that's how do you keep track of, 10 painters in two or three different buildings, and, how do you manage, a system? But we've created systems for each thing that allows the client to say, well, when Slocan Painting is going to be on the job, they're like, well, we're going to be taken care of, and that's something that I think is valuable in any business. When you have that system where a client can come in and see already that you're handling all of their objectives right out of the gate. They didn't even realize it, but you've already laid out the framework. Now all they have to do is pick out colors and textures and, oh, I want that wall here. And it's like you can allow them the freedom and the safety and the comfort to be creative without having to, address every hiccup, or, that's going to happen, but minimizing that to the point where,
Absolutely.
you can get on the same page. And that's really, been at the beginning phase of every project, that initial qualification where we talk about what our process is. When the customer says, hey, I've got XYZ that I want. And I say, okay, great. This is how we do it.
Right. And what have been the most effective or kind of biggest changes in the systems that you've put in place?
Well, language, verbal, laying it out. I mean, those questions that people don't even understand that's going through their head answering. I mean, it's sort of like if you were to take 10 of your past clients or 20 of them, and you were to look at, common questions or concerns that each one of them had, what are they? And you're going to find a lot of similarities in some of them. You're going to find a consistency addressing those concerns, addressing what made that customer or client, overly, anxious or concerned about. How do you handle that? And how did you handle it in the past? And well, if you could copy and paste that and put it into words, what is that going to look like? So that way your next customer, I want an addition, but I don't know I don't even know where to start. I'm like, I have some ideas floating around in my head, and you're the guy who's going to put like measurements and, specs to that, loose idea in my head because I saw it in a magazine or it looks cool. Can I do it here? If there was like a step-by-step process that you could link together between those past 20 clients that had, all similar sort of connected experiences that you had to address throughout those 20 experiences with those clients, what similarities were there and how could you, lay out that framework to answer those questions or to lay it out to, talk about from A to Z, how do you take it to permit, to the how do you get it from their head to the permit center? If there was like a linear fashion, I know it's not cookie cutter perfect, but there's always going to be some nuances there, if you will, but there is a step-by-step process that you've been doing, since you've been in architecture that you probably may not have been aware of too much because you do it intuitively. The customer doesn't. They have to come to you and rely on your intuitiveness. Like, well, no, this is automatically how I do it. Each time they come up with that question, you have to answer that question on how you do it and what your process is. If you were to lay out that at the beginning, how would that sort of smooth things out. So they're like, that's right. He did say that this is how we're going to do it. And this is what we have a week to decide on that, or whatever. You can kind of set deadlines, which will kind of let you off the hook for a week and you can go focus on something else instead of handling every hiccup in between. Maybe there's a way you can kind of free yourself up and, and allow them to, sort of marinate into making their decisions and then come back to the table. You can have maybe a process. I don't know what that looks like in architecture because I'm not an architect, but
Yeah,
I
we
know
do a
there.
lot of that. It's huge. I mean, especially when you're interviewing, usually before you start a project with somebody, it'll go through a number of back and forths because it's a big decision, a big process.
Imagine if you made it to where that Studio Netta, they have a great track record, great reputation. Their work, I've seen it, it's on the website, it's beautiful stuff. He's very responsive, he's answered every question. What if you prompted people who were interested in getting an addition or a remodel done, were already halfway through the process of, Q&A with your company without you having to really deal with it. And when they're like, okay, we're ready to sit down with you, Travis, and discuss nuts and bolts. We've got the basic idea of what we want. We like what you've said to us and how you've walked us through this period. When can we meet? That's kind of what we're talking about here is setting up that process to where it's like, okay, let me know when you're ready for game day and I'll be there and I'm going to be your coach and I'm going to come up with the plays and you're going to know, because they've already gone through that process of you asking the preliminary basics, like maybe, I'm sure you ask the same questions at the beginning of every relationship with every client, like
Yeah,
what scale, maybe how big, when, where, who do you have to do the work, or have you discussed with any contractors? Do you need referrals? I've got guys, I've got companies that have been reliable sources. They may not be the cheapest in town, but they're the most reliable and they're the most detailed. If you want a basic construction, I people for that too. You can have some of those things in place to where you're addressing some of those concerns and they're like, wow, he's the go-to guy because, and that's stuff that you probably like have gone through ad nauseum with almost every client at some point, I'm sure. You've probably had to address a lot of those concerns right
Yeah,
out
we
of the gate.
and we set up a kind of, a guideline for each phase of the process,
Mhm.
that's helped structure all of those conversations. So,
Yeah.
at the beginning, that's certainly the biggest open-ended question, but sharing that with clients certainly helps structure and direct the conversation and kind of minimize their questions and unknowns.
Out of all the people that you talk to, what percentage of them are what I'll call tire kickers, people that are just kind of like feeling, you know, what it might be like to get an addition and they might, hit you up with a bunch of questions. They're curious. They seem like they're almost ready, but then, they ghost you and then they're like, well, what happened? They seemed like they were hot on the trail and they were ready to do this addition or this remodel and now they're ghosting, now they're all of a sudden, for whatever reason, maybe they had a personal thing, maybe they're income change, whatever. But for some reason, all of a sudden, that happens to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain number of projects that don't go through or you learn they've gone with somebody else, but it's over the years, I think it's become easier and easier to see who's set up and interested in moving forward with the project
So
versus
you
who's
have a way of qualifying people
exactly. Yeah, so
to kind of sift through the people that are ready
yeah,
to.
some projects aren't a good fit. Some people aren't interested in doing a project just at the moment, and exactly like you're saying, kicking the
So
tires.
there are certain questions, key questions that you probably intuitively look for when you're conversing with
Exactly.
that new client to kind of qualify whether they're the right fit or not.
Exactly. Yeah, and um there's there's a range of
And if you were to have somebody to handle those preliminary questions, would that kind of allow you to focus on the things that really matter more than going through the qualification process?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely a huge yeah, it'd be a, one of those processes that's kind of great to automate more and more.
I mean, that, sometimes is like, okay, we've been down this road and, you get excited and then you're like, oh, yep, they're probably not going to be the right fit. And that happens. I mean, that's just, part of going through and, I go shopping sometimes and I get really excited about something and I'm thinking I'm going to get it. And then all of a sudden something in me changes and I'm like, yeah, I think I'm going to save my money, or whatever, it happens. I mean, it happens to everybody. There's nothing we can do to control it, but there are ways that we can kind of differentiate when it's time to, come to the table and really, present, your service and your offer, to what, you can do for them because you can now tell that they're ready and they definitely want your service. And I think the more you can offer them, the better you're going to position yourself to be more valuable than the next architect that might be hard to get a hold of because he's so inundated or, like for whatever reason. Well, yeah, I tried calling him yesterday. He didn't return my call, and it's been 2 days, and they never returned my call. We gained a lot of customers that way because our response rate is so high. That's one of the biggest things is that I think customers, especially when we're working with clients, they like the attentiveness. They like to feel like not only we say we care, but our response rate shows that we're here with you the whole step of the way. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to jump every time they say jump. It just means that we respond within an acceptable time period, a couple hours. And it doesn't mean that I'm picking up the phone and calling. I have other people and I have systems that handle that, which has been a blessing because it takes some of the heat off of me having to stop what I'm doing, change gears, think about this other thing that might be just you might consider it an interruption because you're knee deep in something that really requires some thought or some concentration or the passion you put into whatever it is, and then day to day distraction. I won't call them distractions because they are valuable clients that have valid concerns and can but they can be addressed in ways that maybe don't require our expertise because they're
Absolutely. Pull you away.
pretty standard answers, or hey, I can get back with you next week, or let's schedule a time, I'm free, here's my calendar. It takes
Absolutely.
10, 15 minutes for me to answer that on the phone and stop what I'm doing. If there was a way that I could, have that, addressed, that would be ideal. My admin does that a lot. And, of course, email is a great thing, of course, too. So most of us work off of that. So I'm going to wrap things up here unless you have any other questions or any other things that, you wanted to share.
No, this has been great. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Justin. It's been great to talk with you and run through some of these things together.
I'm gonna compile some notes, and I'll just reach back out in touch with you, and I'll share with you the notes that I've got from our conversation, and hopefully that'll be useful. And it's been great getting to know you, Travis, and I wish you the best in 2026. We'll talk soon. Okay,
Likewise.
take care.